It wasn't her. Gold. Noel saw everything. Gold. The parrot's shrill cry, erupting into the suffocating silence of the courtroom, made Judge Helena grip her gavel. On that Christmas Eve, the fate of elderly Mrs. Clara, accused of the brutal murder of her own brother, hung by a thread under the weight of overwhelming evidence. As the prosecution wove its web of guilt and the defendant wept in despair, Noel's voice, a mere pet, echoed like a disturbing enigma. But what did gold mean? And why had the parrot suddenly become the centerpiece of a trial that seemed already decided? The murmur that followed Noel's cry was like a wave breaking the respectful, almost funereal silence of the courtroom. Lawyers whispered, journalists exchanged incredulous glances, and even the security guards seemed momentarily lost. Judge Helena, with her always impeccable posture and penetrating gaze, felt a shiver run down her spine. She had presided over hundreds of cases, some shocking, others moving, but never had a parrot burst forth with such vehemence, uttering words so enigmatic and, at the same time, so pertinent to the core of the accusation. Her gavel rested on the table, but the hand holding it did not raise it to immediately restore order. Instead, her grey eyes, usually so impassive, fixed on Mrs. Clara. The elderly woman, previously bowed by the weight of the accusation and despair, had lifted her head. There was a spark, a tiny flame of hope in her tear-filled eyes as she watched Noel, who now seemed exhausted, perched on the shoulder of an officer who had rescued him from the floor. The parrot, with its green and blue feathers, seemed to have fulfilled its mission, its small head tilted as if awaiting a response. The prosecutor, Dr. Almeida, a corpulent man with a booming voice, was the first to compose himself. "Your Honor, with all due respect, we cannot allow a pet to interrupt proceedings. It's absurd, an unacceptable distraction. I request that the animal be removed and that we proceed with the verdict." He gestured with his hands, his indignation evident. Judge Helena finally raised her hand, a gesture that silenced the room more effectively than any gavel strike. "Dr. Almeida, your objection is noted. However," she paused, her gaze sweeping the room. The words uttered by the animal, unusual as they may be, carry a strange resonance with the case at hand. Gold. Noel saw everything. Gold. The millionaire inheritance, the alleged motive for the crime. I cannot simply ignore this. Internally, Helena fought against the skepticism that had shaped her as a magistrate. Reason screamed that it was nonsense, a coincidence, perhaps even a trick, but something deeper, an intuition that rarely deceived her, whispered that there was something there. The anguish in Clara's eyes, the way the parrot seemed to have spoken with such a clear purpose. It was Christmas Eve, a time for miracles and unexpected truths, and perhaps, just perhaps, the truth was manifesting itself in the most improbable way. "Ladies and gentlemen," Helena declared, her voice firm, but with a note of consideration that surprised many, "the court will enter an immediate recess. I ask that Mrs. Clara be accompanied and that the parrot Noel remain in custody in a suitable environment. I cannot deliver a verdict with such a peculiar doubt hanging over this court. Justice, after all, must be blind but not deaf. And today, it seems an unexpected voice has called our attention." She stood up, her gaze meeting Clara's for a brief moment. There was no promise, only a newfound determination. The path ahead would be arduous, perhaps even ridiculous to some, but Judge Helena knew she could not move forward without investigating the parrot's enigma. That cry, "Gold! Noel saw everything!" had planted a seed of uncertainty in her heart, and she felt it was her duty, not just as a judge, but as a human being, to ensure that this seed had the chance to blossom into truth. Christmas Eve, which seemed destined to be a day of condemnation, had just taken a completely unexpected turn. Helena retired to her chambers, the weight of the gavel still in her hand, but now it was the weight of uncertainty that bothered her most. The courtroom's buzz, which had previously sounded like an out-of-tune orchestra, was now a distant echo. She sat in her leather chair, her eyes fixed on the window where snowflakes had begun to fall, painting the city pure white. Gold! Noel saw everything. Gold! The parrot's words hammered in her mind, a challenge to her logic, her experience, to everything she believed about law and order. Her assistant, Dr. Carvalho, a meticulous man with years of service, knocked on the door. "Your Honor, the press is in an uproar. Prosecutor Almeida is indignant. And Mrs. Clara, she seems to have found new hope." Helena sighed, turning to him. "Dr. Carvalho, I know it seems absurd, but I cannot ignore it. There's something in the way that Bird spoke, in the clarity of its words, and the connection to the inheritance is undeniable." Carvalho adjusted his glasses. "I understand your concern, Your Honor, but how do we proceed? Do we summon an ornithologist? A parrot interpreter?" A slight smile, almost a tremor, crossed his lips, but he quickly suppressed it. Helena did not smile. "No, Dr. Carvalho, it's not about what the parrot means, but about what it saw. Noel saw everything. That's what intrigues me. And gold, it's the inheritance at stake. I ask you to review all testimonies, all documentary evidence with a fresh perspective. Look for any mention, however small, of gold objects, of places where gold might have been kept, of any detail that might have been overlooked in the haste to build the case against Mrs. Clara." Meanwhile, in the custody room, Mrs. Clara embraced Noel, who now rested calmly on her shoulder. The tears in her eyes were no longer of despair, but of fragile hope. "You saw, didn't you, my Noel? You know the truth," she whispered, stroking the bird's green feathers. The parrot's presence was a balm for her soul, a promise that perhaps, just perhaps, justice could still reach her. She felt the gaze of one of the officers, a young man with a gentle demeanor, who watched the scene with respectful curiosity, touched by the sight. Far from there, in a bustling cafe, Clara's nephew, Marcos, leafed through a newspaper, trying to disguise the unease that consumed him. The news of the recess and the parrot's testimony was already circulating, spreading like wildfire. A cold sweat ran down his temple. He had planned every detail, forged the evidence with diabolical meticulousness, convinced that his aunt's conviction was inevitable. But now that stupid bird. Gold! Noel saw everything. The words echoed in his mind, a dark premonition threatening to unravel his deception. He needed to act, and fast, before the intuition of that skeptical judge unraveled the web of lies he had so carefully woven. His fingers drummed nervously on the table, greed mixing with fear, a poison in his veins. Helena, in turn, felt the pressure from the community, the prosecutor, and her own reason. But the image of Clara's tear-filled eyes, now with a glimmer of hope, and Noel's persistent voice, propelled her with unusual force. It was a chance, however small, to correct a wrong, to seek the truth where no one would dare to look. On that Christmas Eve, the search for justice had transformed into a personal journey, where intuition and compassion began to guide the steps of a magistrate who, until then, had prided herself on being guided only by the cold logic of the law. She knew the task would be monumental, but the seed of doubt had germinated in her heart, and she was determined to nurture it with all her dedication. Clara's future, and perhaps her own faith in humanity, depended on it. Helena spent Christmas Eve in her office, immersed in piles of documents that once seemed trivial, but were now scrutinized with renewed intensity. Snow fell incessantly outside, painting the city pure white, but the cold she felt came from within, a mix of apprehension and a strange, almost guilty, excitement. She had instructed Dr. Carvalho to re-examine every detail of the case, and he, despite his pragmatic nature and initial skepticism, had dedicated himself to the task with contained seriousness. The judge knew she was challenging years of precedents, the cold logic of the law and the patience of many colleagues, but the image of Mrs. Clara, with that glimmer of hope in her tear-filled eyes, was a beacon that propelled her with unusual force. She leafed through police reports, bank statements of Clara's deceased brother, Mr. Eduardo, and the testimonies of the few relatives. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, nothing that pointed to gold beyond the inheritance itself, which was already the alleged motive for the crime. Dr. Carvalho, in his own office, felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He had been skeptical at first, considering the Parrot's intervention a hoax or a bizarre coincidence, but Judge Helena's unwavering determination was contagious, and he trusted her discernment. His eyes, protected by thin-rimmed glasses, scanned the pages of an inventory of assets, a lengthy and tedious document that listed every possession of Mr. Eduardo. The man's fortune was vast, diversified in real estate, stocks, and some valuable family jewels. But gold? There was a mention of a small, antique safe, inherited from his parents, which contained objects of sentimental value, including some old gold coins. It was a minuscule, almost insignificant detail buried in a much larger list of assets. He frowned, surprise mixing with doubt. Could this be it? Such a tenuous clue coming from a parrot? He marked the passage with a sticky note and decided to bring the finding to the judge as quickly as possible, feeling a shiver of anticipation. In the adapted custody room, which now seemed less cold, Mrs. Clara spent the night in Noel's company. The parrot, which had previously been agitated and uttering its enigmatic cries, now slept peacefully on its improvised perch, a soft blanket over a chair. Clara, however, could not sleep. Hope was a light yet precious burden, which she feared would break at any moment. She stroked Noel's green and blue feathers, remembering the days when he and her brother Eduardo were inseparable. Eduardo loved to show Noel his little gold things, small collection pieces he kept in his office, some old coins and medallions. She remembered once when Noel, still a chick, had knocked over one of these coins, and Eduardo had laughed fondly, saying, "Noel, you rascal, you like gold." These memories, once overshadowed by the pain of loss and the humiliation of the accusation, now shone with new meaning, like small Christmas lights. Where did Eduardo keep these coins? She tried to recall, but her elderly, tired mind struggled to focus on the details. Meanwhile, in his luxurious apartment, Marcos could not contain the fury and panic that consumed him. The news of the court's recess and the extra investigation, all because of a bird, was a nightmare materializing. He had spent months planning every detail, creating the perfect narrative, planting the evidence in the right place with diabolical meticulousness. The safe in Eduardo's office, where he kept the original will documents and some antique jewels, was the perfect place to stage the crime scene. He had replaced the will, stolen the jewels, and left the murder weapon, a bronze statuette with Clara's fingerprints. But the parrot? Gold. Noel saw everything. The damned bird had witnessed more than he imagined, and its words echoed like an alarm bell in his mind. Marcos needed to ensure Noel never spoke again. He began to devise a dark plan, his eyes fixed on the wall clock, Christmas Eve becoming a desperate race against time. His fingers drummed nervously on the table, greed mixing with fear, a poison in his veins. Helena received Dr. Carvalho in her office, and he, with a mix of apprehension and a glint in his eyes, pointed to the mention of old gold coins and the safe in the inventory. "It might be a coincidence, Your Honor, but it's the only direct mention of gold that isn't the inheritance itself, meaning the money. Helena took the document, her eyes scanning the line with new intensity. An antique safe. Eduardo was a man of habit, methodical and attached to his collections. Where could this safe be? A new line of investigation opened, fragile as a freshly fallen snowflake, but with the potential to unravel the truth behind that complex plot. Helena's intuition, once an almost inaudible whisper, was now a clearer, more insistent voice in her heart. The search for justice would not just be about documents and human testimonies, but about understanding an enigmatic cry, the memory of a past, and the courage to look beyond the obvious, where the truth lay hidden. Christmas night advanced, and with it, the hope of a twist that could change Clara's fate. Christmas night advanced, and with it, the hope of a twist that could change Clara's fate. Helena, with the inventory in hand, felt renewed energy despite her fatigue. The antique safe, the gold coins, it was a clue, however tenuous, and she could not ignore it. "Dr. Carvalho," she said, her voice firm, "we need to go to Mr. Eduardo's property. Immediately, we need to locate this safe." Carvalho nodded, surprise still visible on his face, but his loyalty to the judge was stronger than his skepticism. He knew that when Helena decided to follow an intuition, she was rarely wrong. "I will arrange the necessary authorization, Your Honor. It will be a challenge on Christmas Eve, but I will do my best." As Carvalho hurried to organize the logistics, Helena allowed herself a moment to reflect. Eduardo's house, a place of memories for Clara, was now a crime scene under police custody. Entering there again with such a specific purpose was like looking for a needle in a haystack, but the needle in this case could stitch together the truth. She thought of Mrs. Clara, alone, but with Noel by her side. That parrot, with its unusual voice, had become the guiding thread of a plot that seemed unravelable. Justice, she pondered, did not always reveal itself in the most obvious evidence, but often in the most subtle details, in those that reason tended to dismiss. In the custody room, Clara tried to remember. The safe. Eduardo kept it in the office, yes, but where exactly? She visualized the room in her mind, the shelves filled with books, the large dark wooden desk, the comfortable armchairs. Eduardo had a special attachment to this safe, which belonged to his parents. He called it the family's secret chest. She remembered once, many years ago, when he had shown her and Noel some of the old coins, explaining their stories. Noel, curious, had tried to peck at one of them, and Eduardo had laughed. "Noel likes gold," he had said. The image was vivid, but the exact location of the safe remained hazy in her memory, like a dense fog. She closed her eyes, trying to force the memory, feeling the frustration and the weight of her age. Far from there, Marcos received a phone call from a police contact, a junior officer he had bribed. "Sir, Judge Helena is requesting authorization to search Mr. Eduardo's house again. It seems they are looking for an antique safe." Marcos's blood ran cold. The safe. He had emptied the safe of the jewels and the original will, but the safe itself was still there, hidden behind a false bookshelf in the office. And worse, the camera he had installed to monitor the house, and which had recorded his own movements while forging the evidence, was disguised inside the safe. He had planned to remove it after the verdict was given, but now there was no time. Panic turned into cold fury. He needed to get there before them. Marcos grabbed his car keys, his heart pounding uncontrollably. Christmas Eve had turned into a race against time. He had underestimated the judge, and even more so the parrot. Gold! Noel saw everything. The bird's words were now a war cry in his mind, a reminder of imminent danger. He needed to destroy that camera, erase any trace of his presence. The greed that propelled him was now tempered by paralyzing fear. He drove at high speed through the snow-covered streets, the darkness of Christmas night swallowing his thoughts and leading him towards Eduardo's house, where the truth, or its destruction, awaited him. Helena and Carvalho, in turn, were already on their way. The authorization, surprisingly, had been granted quickly, given the unusual urgency. The officer accompanying Carvalho had been receptive, perhaps touched by the strangeness of the case. The snow was falling harder now, and visibility was low, but Helena felt an urgency that transcended the weather. That safe, she knew, was the key. Justice, she believed, was about to be revealed, driven by a voice no one expected to hear. Clara's hope, Helena's intuition, Noel's cry, everything converged on that cold Christmas night, on Eduardo's house, where everyone's fate was about to be unraveled. The police car slid cautiously through the snow-covered streets, its headlights cutting through the dense darkness of Christmas Eve. Helena watched the flakes dance in the air, each seeming to carry a secret. Beside her, Dr. Carvalho remained silent, the tension in his posture almost palpable. He had efficiently arranged the authorization, but the apprehension in his eyes revealed his struggle to reconcile legal logic with his superior's intuition. Your Honor, the house is under police custody. The officer on duty has already been alerted to our arrival, he informed, his voice a little hoarse. Helena merely nodded, her thoughts far from protocols. She felt a chill in her stomach, a mix of nervousness and a growing conviction. That safe, the gold coins, the parrot's cry, everything fit into a narrative that reason refused to accept, but which her heart, somehow, embraced. Justice, she reflected, was a complex tapestry, woven with invisible threads of emotion and truth, not just with the solidity of material evidence. Meanwhile, a few kilometers away, Marcos drove like a madman, the speedometer dangerously fluctuating. Fear was a tight knot in his throat, and rage boiled in his veins. That damned parrot, that safe! He cursed his own meticulousness. The camera, so small and well hidden within the safe's mechanism, was his undoing. He had planned everything so it would only be discovered after Clara was convicted. An insurance, in case something went wrong, but now it was a ticking time bomb. If the judge found the safe and opened it in a way that revealed the camera, his entire plan would collapse. His fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. The snow, falling non-stop, seemed to mock his haste, making the road slippery and dangerous. He needed to get there first, destroy the evidence, and then, perhaps, blame the police for negligence. His mind spun in a spiral of despair and cold calculations. In the custody room, Clara sat, a thin blanket over her shoulders. Noel nestled in her lap. Hope, once a small glimmer, now seemed stronger but still fragile. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure the image of Eduardo's office. Where had he put the safe? She remembered a bookshelf, one he had custom-made, with a secret compartment. Yes, that was it. Eduardo loved his little mysteries. She opened her eyes, a flash of clarity in her tired gaze. If only she could tell someone. But she was alone, just with Noel, who looked at her with his intelligent, curious eyes. Helena's police car finally stopped in front of Eduardo's imposing house, now enveloped in a silent blanket of snow. The weak streetlights barely illuminated the facade. An officer on duty, his face marked by the cold, opened the gate. Your Honor, Dr. Carvalho, the house is intact. Helena felt a shiver. The house seemed like a tomb guarding secrets. Thank you, officer. Let's go straight to the office, she instructed, her voice filled with a determination that surprised even Carvalho. They entered, the cold, still air of the house enveloping them. Each step echoed in the silence, and the snow accumulating outside seemed to muffle any sound from the outside world. Eduardo's office was exactly as described. Books, papers, the large desk. Nothing out of place, nothing that screamed safe. Marcos, in turn, had just parked his car a few blocks away, hidden among the trees. He got out, the icy wind cutting his face, and ran through the snow, his shoes sinking with each step. He knew the police would be there, but hoped the darkness and the blizzard would help him go unnoticed. His heart beat like a war drum. He needed to be fast, stealthy. He reached the back of the house, where there was a window he knew to be less secure. With a quick and silent forced entry, he managed to get inside, feeling the cold air of the house in his lungs. He was in. Now, he just needed to get to the office, find the safe, and destroy that damned camera. The race against time had reached its peak, and the truth hung in the cold air of that Christmas Eve, about to be unveiled or buried forever. Marcos, his heart pounding in his chest, moved stealthily through the dark corridors of Eduardo's house. Every creak of the floorboards under his feet sounded like thunder in the sepulchral silence. Moonlight, filtered through the dusty windows, created ghostly shadows that danced around him. He could hear muffled voices coming from the office. Helena's firm voice and Carvalho's more hesitant one. They were there. Adrenaline coursed through his veins, mixing with dread. He needed to be fast, faster than them. The safe was behind that false bookshelf, and the camera, his condemnation, was inside. He quickened his pace, his eyes fixed on the office door, a desperate plan forming in his mind. Inside the office, Helena and Carvalho examined every inch of the room. The dark wooden bookshelves, filled with antique books, seemed impenetrable. "There's nothing here, Your Honor," Carvalho murmured, running his hand over a row of dusty volumes. No sign of a safe. Helena, however, did not give up. Her eyes scanned the wall, looking for any irregularity, any detail that might have gone unnoticed. She remembered Clara's words, the memory of her brother Eduardo and his attachment to little mysteries. Such a methodical man would not leave a valuable safe in plain sight. Her hand slid along one of the shelves, feeling the texture of the wood. Suddenly her fingers brushed against a small, almost imperceptible crack between a panel and the wall, a crack that seemed not to belong to the original structure of the shelf. She frowned, her intuition sharpening. Marcos was a few meters from the office door, cold sweat trickling down his forehead. He could hear Helena's voice more clearly now. A crack. Here. Panic struck him like lightning. They were close, too close. He needed to act. With a quick and silent movement, he pushed the office door open, just enough to see Helena with her hand on the bookshelf, her eyes fixed on the crack. Their hearts beat in unison, hers with the excitement of discovery, his with the terror of imminence. Helena felt a slight shiver. The crack. It was subtle, but it was there. She pressed the wooden panel harder. An almost inaudible click resonated in the silence of the office, and a section of the bookshelf began to slowly slide inward, revealing a dark compartment. Inside, wrapped in a dark velvet cloth, was the antique safe, exactly as Clara had described. A smile of triumph and relief began to form on her lips. "Dr. Carvalho, look!" she exclaimed, her voice choked with emotion. Carvalho approached, his eyes wide with surprise. "Unbelievable, Your Honor! A secret compartment!" He reached out to touch the safe, but Helena stopped him with a gesture. "Carefully, Dr. Carvalho, we don't know what else might be here." At that exact moment, a muffled noise from the corridor made both of them turn sharply. Marcos, seeing the safe revealed, felt his world collapse. He knew there was no more time for discretion. With a cry of fury and despair, he burst through the door, running towards the safe, his eyes fixed on the small opening where the camera was hidden. "No! You won't ruin everything!" he roared, his voice distorted by panic. Helena and Carvalho were petrified, the scene unfolding before them in slow motion. The greedy nephew, whom they believed to be far away, had appeared like a ghost, his presence confirming their worst suspicions. The race against time was no longer a metaphor. It was a brutal reality, and the truth or its destruction was mere seconds away. The cold air of Christmas Eve filled with palpable tension, as Clara's fate and the integrity of justice hung by a thread. Marcos burst into the office like a storm, his eyes bloodshot with panic and fury fixed on the newly revealed safe. Helena and Carvalho for an instant were paralyzed, surprise and shock etched on their faces. Marcos's cry, distorted by despair, broke the sepulchral silence of the house, echoing off the dusty walls. "No, you won't ruin everything," he roared again, his voice laden with a rage that bordered on insanity. He advanced, his steps heavy and disordered, towards the secret compartment. Judge Helena, despite the fright, reacted with surprising agility. Her mind, trained for the chaos of courtrooms, processed the situation in milliseconds. Marcos was not there to negotiate. He was there to destroy. The truth she so desperately sought was about to be annihilated. "Stop! Marcos, don't move!" she ordered, her voice firm and authoritative, trying to deter her nephew with the force of her presence. But Marcos was beyond reason. Greed and fear had blinded him. He threw himself against the bookshelf, his frantic hands trying to reach the safe, the small opening where the camera was hidden. He needed to tear it out, smash it, erase any trace of his betrayal. Dr. Carvalho, recovering from the initial shock, acted on instinct. He placed himself between Marcos and the safe, extending his arms to block the man's advance. "Marcos, don't do it. Think of the consequences." His voice, though less imposing than Helena's, carried a tone of serious warning. Marcos pushed him with force, the force of desperation, and Carvalho stumbled backward, almost falling. The violence wasn't physical in the sense of aggression, but the intensity of that push, the fury in Marcos's eyes, was a clear manifestation of danger. Helena watched the scene unfold, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the camera was the key and that Marcos would do anything to destroy it. With a quick decision, she lunged forward, not to physically confront Marcos, but to protect the safe. Her agile fingers reached the small lever that controlled the opening mechanism of the false bookshelf, and, with a firm movement, she pushed it back. The section of the bookshelf began to slide back into its original position, threatening to trap Marcos, or worse, the safe. Marcos screamed in frustration and tried to hold the bookshelf, but it was too late. The wooden panel closed with a dull thud, sealing the secret compartment, and with it the safe and the camera. His eyes, now wide with terror, met Helena's. The truth was there, sealed, but safe. "No, it can't be," Marcos whispered, his voice choked, his body trembling. Panic completely overwhelmed him, transforming his fury into paralyzing despair. He had failed. The evidence, which he thought he had under control, was now in the hands of justice. Helena took a deep breath, feeling relief flood her body. Adrenaline still coursed through her veins, but the sense of duty fulfilled began to settle in. She had protected the truth. Dr. Carvalho, composing himself, looked at Marcos with a mix of pity and revulsion. The officer on duty, alerted by the noise, burst into the office, weapon drawn, assessing the scene with surprise. "Officer, arrest this man," Helena instructed, her voice still slightly trembling, but imbued with unquestionable authority. He attempted to destroy crucial evidence. Marcos was handcuffed, his gaze empty and defeated. Christmas Eve, which he had hoped would seal Clara's conviction and his own fortune, had turned into his worst nightmare. Justice, driven by a parrot and a judge's intuition, had prevailed. The safe, now secure, held not only the gold coins, but the irrefutable proof of Clara's innocence and Marcos's guilt. The truth, finally, was about to be revealed. The silence, which had previously been tense, now weighed with Marcos's defeat. The officer escorted the nephew out of the office, leaving Helena and Dr. Carvalho alone with the safe sealed behind the wooden panel. The judge, still breathless from the adrenaline, felt a mix of relief and profound sadness. One man's greed had almost destroyed an elderly woman's life, and the truth, so close, needed to be fully unveiled. "Dr. Carvalho," Helena said, her voice calmer now but still laden with emotion, "we need to open this safe with the utmost care. The camera Marcos tried to destroy must be inside." Carvalho nodded, his face pale. The scene he had just witnessed had dispelled any lingering skepticism. Helena's intuition was, indeed, a beacon. "I'll call forensics, Your Honor," They'll have the proper equipment to ensure no evidence is damaged. While they waited, Helena allowed herself a moment to reflect. Eduardo's house, once a home, was now a stage for revelations. She thought of Clara, alone in the custody room, unaware of what was happening. The hope she had felt so strongly was about to materialize. Christmas, which had seemed bleak, was beginning to take on new meaning, one of justice and renewal. Far from there, in the custody room, Clara felt a strange calm. Noel, nestled in her lap, seemed to share her tranquility. He chirped softly, and Clara stroked his feathers. "Ah, Noel, my little one. Did Judge Helena manage to find the safe? Will she understand?" The parrot tilted its head, as if understanding every word, and let out a soft murmur. Clara's faith, once shaken, now solidified, driven by the comforting presence of her loyal friend. She closed her eyes, visualizing Eduardo's office again, the bookshelf, the secret compartment. The image was clearer now, as if the proximity of the truth was helping her remember. Back at Eduardo's house, the forensics team arrived quickly, despite Christmas Eve. With delicate tools and impressive expertise, they managed to reopen the secret compartment. The antique safe was there, untouched. With gloves and tweezers, one of the experts meticulously examined the safe. "Your Honor, there's a small, almost imperceptible hole here on the side of the clasp," he pointed out. "It seems to be where the camera was disguised." With extreme care, he removed the small device. It was minuscule, almost a toy, but its potential was immense. Helena took the camera, feeling the weight of responsibility in her hands. "We need to see what's recorded," she said, her voice firm. The forensics team connected the camera to a portable monitor. The screen lit up, revealing grainy but clear enough images. The recording began. It was Marcos. He was in Eduardo's office, manipulating documents, taking the original will and replacing it with another. Then he approached Eduardo's lifeless body and staged a scene, placing objects in his uncle's hands to incriminate Clara. His gestures were calculated, cold, full of a silent cruelty. Marcos's face, contorted in an expression of greed and satisfaction, filled the screen. He spoke, though without audio, gesturing to the camera as if explaining his macabre plan. Helena watched every second, her eyes welling up. Indignation and sadness mixed with relief. The truth. It was there, undeniable, irrefutable. Carvalho, beside her, let out a heavy sigh, the disbelief on his face giving way to deep consternation. "My God, Your Honor. He really did all this." His voice was a whisper. The recording continued, showing Marcos hiding the safe, and then the camera, inside the secret compartment. With each scene, Clara's innocence became more luminous, and the darkness of Marcos's betrayal deeper. Christmas Eve, which had begun with the shadow of injustice, was now illuminated by the light of truth. Helena felt a wave of gratitude. Noel's enigmatic cry, the intuition that propelled her, the courage to follow an unexpected path. Everything had culminated in this moment. Justice, she knew, had found its way, even in the most improbable circumstances. The next step was clear. Clara would be free. Helena turned off the monitor, feeling the weight of that video in her soul. The indignation was profound, but the relief of holding the truth in her hands was even greater. She turned to Dr. Carvalho, who still seemed shocked, his eyes fixed on emptiness. "Dr. Carvalho, prepare the documents. We need to go to the custody room immediately. Mrs. Clara will be released tonight." Her voice, though tired, carried unquestionable authority and an urgency that allowed no hesitation. Carvalho, awakening from his stupor, nodded vigorously. "Yes, Your Honor. I'll do that right away. And Marcos, he will be formally charged based on this irrefutable evidence." Justice, finally, was taking its course. In the custody room, Clara was almost asleep, with Noel nestled on her chest. The parrot, sensing a change in the air, chirped softly, and Clara opened her eyes. The door opened and Judge Helena entered, followed by Dr. Carvalho and an officer. Clara's heart pounded. She expected the worst, the final verdict. But Helena's gaze was different, not of judgment, but of deep compassion. "Mrs. Clara," Helena began, her voice soft, "the truth has come to light. The charges against you have been dropped. You are free." Clara blinked, the words seeming to float in the air. Free. She couldn't process it. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of confusion and slowly of an almost painful hope. Noel, as if understanding, flew from her lap to Helena's shoulder, rubbing his head against the judge's cheek. "Free? But how?" she whispered. Her voice choked. Helena smiled gently, stroking the parrot. "Your friend, Noel, guided us, and we found the evidence that completely exonerates you. Marcos was the one who fabricated everything." The revelation about Marcos hit Clara like an electric shock. Her nephew, the one she trusted. The pain of betrayal mixed with overwhelming relief. She felt her legs weaken, and Helena approached, offering her an arm. "Let's go home, Mrs. Clara. You have a lot to process." The journey back home was a blur of emotions. Snow was still falling, but the world seemed clearer, lighter. Upon arrival, Clara's house, once a place of solitude and sadness, now seemed like a refuge. Noel flew around the room, chirping happily, as if celebrating his companion's return. Helena and Cavallo explained the details, showing Clara the camera footage. Seeing Marcos manipulating the evidence, his face contorted by greed, was a painful blow. Clara cried, not only for the injustice suffered, but for the loss of trust in a family member. That Christmas, which had seemed doomed, was transforming into a rebirth. The community, upon learning of the twist, reacted with a mix of shock and remorse. The news spread like wildfire, and the people who had previously judged her now felt deep shame. The story of Noel the parrot, the little hero who unraveled the plot, became a legend in the town. His enigmatic voice, initially ignored, had been the guiding thread to the truth. Helena, as she bid farewell to Clara, felt a deep peace. That case had tested her faith in justice, but it had also strengthened it. Human connection, intuition, and the unexpected voice of an animal had prevailed over the darkness of greed. Clara, sitting in her armchair with Noel nestled on her shoulder, looked out the window at the falling snow. Christmas was saved and her life rebuilt. The pain of betrayal would remain, but the joy of freedom and the certainty of justice were greater. She stroked Noel's feathers, feeling immense gratitude for that small being who had been her beacon in the darkness. That Christmas would be remembered not for tragedy, but for the unexpected triumph of truth and the power of a connection that transcends words. That Christmas would be remembered not for tragedy, but for the unexpected triumph of truth and the power of a connection that transcends words. The next morning, Christmas Day dawned with a soft, cold light filtered through Clara's living room curtains. She woke up in her own bed, a luxury that seemed unattainable hours before, and the first thing she felt was Noel's familiar weight on her chest. The parrot looked at her with its curious eyes, as if asking if the nightmare had truly ended. Clara hugged him tenderly, feeling a bittersweet mix of relief and a latent pain. Freedom was an invaluable gift, but the wound of Marcos's betrayal was deep, a scar that would take time to heal. She rose slowly, feeling her body tired, but her soul a little lighter. News of the turnaround spread quickly through the town, and Clara's house, previously avoided, began to receive visitors. Neighbors, friends, and even some who had judged her most harshly came with looks of regret and words of apology. Mrs. Lucia, the neighbor who had always been skeptical, brought a cornmeal cake, her eyes teary. "Mrs. Clara, I am so sorry. We were so unfair," she said, her voice choked. Clara, though still fragile, managed a gentle smile. "Truth always finds its way, Lucia. The important thing is that it prevailed." Noel, perched on her shoulder, chirped softly as if agreeing, and Mrs. Lucia stroked him with admiration. That small bird had become the symbol of justice and Clara's innocence, an unlikely hero uniting the community in a new understanding. While Clara received the support and affection she had so sorely missed, Judge Helena was in her office, even on Christmas Day, reviewing documents for the formalization of charges against Marcos. The satisfaction of having unraveled the plot was immense, but the responsibility of ensuring that justice was fully served weighed heavily on her. She remembered Marcos's empty gaze as he was handcuffed, the greed that had consumed him. It was a somber reminder of how ambition could distort the human soul. Helena knew that the legal path would still be long, but the evidence was irrefutable, and she was determined to see the process through to the end. That case had marked her career, not only for its complexity, but for the lesson that intuition and attentive listening, even to the most unexpected voices, were powerful tools in the search for truth. Clara, sitting in her favorite armchair with Noel in her lap, looked at the Christmas tree she had put up before everything happened. The lights glowed softly, and each ornament seemed to tell a story. The pain of Marcos's betrayal still gripped her heart, but she clung to the certainty that goodness and truth had triumphed. The path to healing would be gradual, but she was no longer alone. The community, though belatedly, embraced her, and Noel's presence was a constant balm. She felt deep gratitude for Judge Helena, for her courage and her faith. That Christmas, which began with the shadow of condemnation, had transformed into a new beginning, a testament to the power of human resilience and the strength of a connection that, like Clara's and Noel's, transcended the barriers of common understanding. Life, she knew, was giving her a second chance, and she would embrace it with all the strength of her soul. Clara felt this strength blossom within her as the Christmas days unfolded. With each neighbor's smile, each sincere hug, a layer of pain and shame peeled away. Noel was her constant reminder that hope at times came in the most unexpected forms. He chirped happily when Mrs. Lucia, her eyes still teary, returned with an apple pie, apologizing again. "I will never doubt your kindness again, Mrs. Clara," she promised, and Clara felt a warmth in her chest. The community, once so quick to judge, now united in a chorus of support and regret, a balm for her wounded soul. Meanwhile, Judge Helena, driven by unwavering determination, worked tirelessly to ensure that justice was fully served. Marcos's case would be exemplary. The camera's evidence, irrefutable and cold, was presented to the prosecutor, who had no doubts. The formalization of charges against him proceeded with surprising speed, even during the year-end recess. News of the recording spread, and the town's initial shock transformed into collective indignation against Marcos's betrayal. The greed that had blinded him now confronted him in the form of relentless legal proceedings. Helena felt the weight of responsibility, but also the satisfaction of seeing the truth prevail. She knew that Marcos's conviction would not bring Clara's brother back, but it would bring peace and the restoration of faith in justice. On the day of Marcos's preliminary hearing, the courtroom was packed, not out of morbid curiosity, but from a palpable desire to see justice done. Clara, though not obliged to attend, decided to go, accompanied by Noel and a retinue of neighbors and friends. She wanted to witness the outcome, not for revenge, but to close that painful chapter of her life. As she entered the room, a murmur of support greeted her. The gazes, once of suspicion, were now of solidarity and respect. Marcos, handcuffed, looked like a broken man, his arrogance replaced by dark despair. He avoided Clara's gaze, unable to face the woman he had tried to destroy. Judge Helena presided over the hearing with solemn seriousness. The prosecutor presented the evidence, detailing the manipulation of the will, the staging of the crime scene, the attempt to destroy the camera. Each word was a blow to the image Marcos had constructed. The camera footage was displayed, and the room held its breath at the coldness of his actions. The truth, once a whisper, now screamed aloud. A collective sigh of relief and indignation swept through the room, a weight finally lifted from many hearts. Helena, in delivering the decision to keep Marcos in custody, awaiting formal trial, felt a complex emotion. It was not personal triumph, but the confirmation that her intuition, guided by a parrot, had unveiled a profound darkness. Justice, sometimes slow, had arrived, and with it, the hope that faith in humanity could be restored. She looked at Clara, who sat with Noel on her shoulder, a tear tracing her face, but a glimmer of peace in her eyes. That was the true climax. The restoration of Clara's dignity, the confirmation of her innocence before the world, and the victory of truth over lies. The community, upon leaving the courtroom, surrounded Clara, offering hugs and words of comfort. Christmas, which had seemed ruined, had transformed into a testament to the power of truth and human connection, a new beginning for everyone. Christmas, which had seemed ruined, had transformed into a testament to the power of truth and human connection, a new beginning for everyone. In the days that followed Marcos's preliminary hearing, Mrs. Clara's house, once a solitary refuge, became a haven of welcome. The community, moved by a deep sense of guilt and admiration, unfolded in gestures of affection and reparation. Neighbors brought warm meals, offered help with the garden, and simply sat beside her, sharing stories and laughter. That support, so belated, was a balm for Clara's wounded soul. She felt the pain of Marcos's betrayal still present, like a persistent shadow, but the light of solidarity and justice enveloped her, dispelling the darkness. Noel, her little guardian, was the center of attention, receiving affection and praise, a green-feathered hero who had rewritten destiny. Clara, sitting in her favorite armchair, with Noel nestled on her shoulder, watched the activity in her living room. Mrs. Lucia, who had previously looked at her with suspicion, was now organizing a small fundraiser to repair Clara's roof, damaged by a recent storm. Lucia's eyes shone with a sincerity Clara never imagined seeing. "Mrs. Clara, you are an example to us all. Your strength, your faith, and your Noel," she said, stroking the parrot. Clara smiled, feeling the warmth of that unexpected affection. The triumph was not just hers, it was also the community's, which learned to look beyond appearances and value the truth. Meanwhile, Judge Helena observed the transformation from afar. Clara's case had left an indelible mark on her career and personal life. She had seen the darkest face of greed, but also the unbreakable resilience of the human spirit and the power of an intuition that defied logic. In her chambers, Helena finalized the last details for Marcos's formal trial. The evidence was irrefutable, and conviction was certain. She knew that justice, though sometimes slow, had prevailed spectacularly. The lesson of Noel, the parrot who spoke the truth, echoed in her mind, reminding her that wisdom could come from the most improbable sources. Helena decided to visit Clara, not as a judge, but as someone who had shared a journey. Upon arrival, she found the house full of life and laughter. Clara, with a renewed sparkle in her eyes, greeted her with a tight hug. "Your Honor, Helena, what a pleasant surprise!" The formality dissolved into genuine affection. Noel flew to Helena's shoulder, chirping happily. "Gold! Noel saw everything. Gold!" he repeated, and everyone in the room laughed, remembering the cry that changed everything. Helena sat beside Clara, observing the welcoming scene. "Mrs. Clara, seeing you like this, surrounded by so much affection, is the true victory. Justice is not just about punishment, but about restoring dignity and faith." Clara nodded, her eyes welling up with gratitude. "I wouldn't have made it without you, Your Honor, and without my Noel." She stroked the parrot who nestled against her neck. That moment of human connection and restored justice was the deepest resolution of all conflicts. Clara's life was being rebuilt, brick by brick, with the help of a community that had redeemed itself, and the certainty that truth, however hidden, would always find a voice to manifest itself. The future, once uncertain, now unfolded with the promise of peace and a new beginning. Clara felt this promise materialize with each new day. The house, once silent, filled with laughter and the aroma of cakes brought by neighbors. Mrs. Lucia, with her apple pie, became a constant presence, helping Clara organize the garden, which bloomed again under the January sun. "Mrs. Clara, you taught me so much," Lucia confessed one day as they planted daisies. "Not to judge, to have faith in the truth." Clara smiled, feeling the warmth of sincere friendship. The pain of Marcos's betrayal was still an occasional pang, a scar, but no longer an open wound. She had learned to separate the person from the act, to forgive the community for its haste to condemn, and to find peace in her own resilience. Noel, always by her side, was the personification of this peace, a constant reminder that the voice of truth, however small, could move mountains. The story of Noel and Mrs. Clara spread beyond the limits of the small town, an inspiring tale of justice and redemption. Schools invited Clara for talks where she, accompanied by her parrot, shared her journey, emphasizing the importance of listening, of not rushing to judgment, and of believing in the inherent goodness of people. Noel, on his improvised perch, would let out his gold. Noel saw everything. Gold. At strategic moments, eliciting laughter and tears from the audience, Clara, with her dignity restored and a lighter heart, found a new purpose in her life, transforming her pain into a message of hope. The loneliness that plagued her before the trial had been replaced by a rich tapestry of human connections, woven with threads of compassion and understanding. Meanwhile, Judge Helena observed the unfolding events with quiet satisfaction. Marcos's formal trial had been swift and decisive. The camera's irrefutable evidence sealed his fate. He was sentenced to a just penalty, without fanfare or spectacle, just the cold, relentless logic of the law. Helena felt that this case had been a watershed in her career. It had taught her that justice resided not only in codes and precedents, but in the ability to see beyond the obvious, to trust intuition, and to give a voice to those who could not defend themselves. The cry of a parrot had redefined her understanding of truth. She continued her professional life with a new depth, a wisdom that distinguished her. A year had passed since that Christmas Eve that changed everything. It was December again, and the town was preparing for the festivities. At Clara's house, a small party was being organized. It was not just Christmas, but a celebration of life, truth, and friendship. The tree was lovingly decorated, and the gifts beneath it were symbols of love and gratitude. Clara, sitting in her armchair, watched the joy around her. Noel, on her shoulder, nibbled a sunflower seed, his bright eyes reflecting the tree lights. That year had been a roller coaster of emotions, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and loved. The memory of Eduardo, her brother, now came with a serene peace. Knowing that justice had been done, she stroked Noel's feathers, feeling the gentle beat of his heart. That small being with its unexpected voice had been the beacon that guided her from darkness to light. Life, she knew, was a precious gift. Human connection, the greatest of treasures. The future, once uncertain, now unfolded with the promise of peace and a new beginning, and Clara embraced it with a soul full of gratitude and hope. Clara embraced the future with a soul full of gratitude and hope, and this feeling deepened with each dawn. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, weaving a new tapestry for her life. The house, once an echo of solitude, now resonated with the joy of visits and the buzz of conversations. The garden, which Mrs. Lucia and other neighbors helped revitalize, bloomed with vibrant colors, a mirror of Clara's soul, which also blossomed. She spent hours among the rose bushes, feeling the earth in her hands, a silent therapy that healed the last wounds of betrayal. Noel, invariably, was nearby, perched on a branch, watching her with his intelligent eyes, or nestled on her shoulder, chirping melodies that only they understood with tenderness. The story of Clara and Noel, the parrot who unveiled the truth, became a beacon of hope for many. She received letters from people in other towns, sharing their own struggles and finding comfort in her resilience. Clara, with Mrs. Lucia's help, responded to each one, offering words of encouragement and the certainty that truth, however hidden, would always find a way. She and Noel continued to give talks in schools and community centers, not just to tell their story, but to inspire new generations to value honesty, compassion, and the importance of listening to voices, even the most improbable ones. Noel, with his gold, Noel saw everything gold, was always the star, and his cry, once an enigma, was now a hymn to justice. Judge Helena, in turn, carried the experience of that case as a treasure. She had learned that the law, however robust, was merely a tool. True justice resided in the ability to feel, to intuit, to seek truth with an open heart. Her career gained a new dimension, and her decisions, once guided only by cold logic, were now tempered by a deeper wisdom, an empathy that made her an even more respected magistrate. She and Clara kept in touch, a friendship forged in the fire of adversity, a bond of mutual respect and admiration. Helena visited Clara occasionally, enjoying the peace of the garden and the company of Noel, who always greeted her with an affectionate chirp. Marcos, serving his sentence, was a somber reminder of greed, but his shadow no longer reached the light that enveloped Clara. She had forgiven, not out of forgetfulness, but by choice, freeing herself from the weight of resentment. The memory of her brother Eduardo was now one of affection and longing, without the stain of injustice. She knew he would be proud. It was a spring afternoon, and Clara was sitting on the porch, watching the sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Noel was nestled in her lap, dozing. The gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers and the distant sound of children playing. She closed her eyes, feeling the fullness of that moment. Life, with its unexpected twists, had given her much more than she had ever dreamed of. Not just freedom, but a community, a purpose, and the unwavering certainty that love and truth always triumph. The small parrot in her lap was living proof of this, a green-feathered miracle that had rewritten her story, transforming darkness into a radiant light that would never fade. She smiled, a smile of peace and gratitude, ready for the new chapters that life still held for her.